This NFL offseason, one of the really big, earth-shattering type of news-making moves was what the Seattle Seahawks did, trading away a quality starting center like Max Unger and a first-round pick to the rebuilding New Orleans Saints to get Jimmy Graham. Jimmy Graham. You're talking about a team that won the Super Bowl in the 2013 season, made it back to the Super Bowl, and a lot of intents and purposes should have won that Super Bowl as well, without any big name weapon on the outside in the passing game. Now you're talking about a team that brings in Jimmy Graham, and people are jumping on the bandwagon talking the Seahawks are this team's going to be scary. You give Russell Wilson somebody like that along with Marshawn Lynch in the backfield, oh my God, imagine the magic that could happen. And in some ways you say, hey, that makes sense. You're bringing in a guy like Jimmy Graham, with all the former undrafted wide receivers they had outside like Doug Baldwin, Jermaine Kearse, Ricardo Locke, and Chris Matthews. They're not inspiring fear in anybody. And that Seahawks offense lacked a consistency and also an explosiveness as well in their passing game throughout the past couple of seasons. A guy like Jimmy Graham is designed to come in and fix all of that and change all of that. Give Russell Wilson that big, explosive, physical mismatch. Give him that true go-to guy that he lacked in the passing game. Give him that type of weapon that defenses had to fear, defenses had to game plan for. That could open up things outside. Well, now you sit there and the reality has happened, and Jimmy Graham is now suiting up for the Seattle Seahawks, and we're through 4 games of the 2015 NFL season, and I have to ask the question, what the hell are the Seahawks doing with Jimmy Graham? Now, looking at this trade, we get caught up sometimes as fans and media as well, looking at the big names and looking at the splashy players, the skill players. They're the ones with the sex appeal. They're the ones that typically get the biggest endorsements and get the most media attention because they make the most spectacular kind of attention-grabbing plays, and Jimmy Graham will certainly fits into that category. But when you look at the Seattle Seahawks, you're talking about a team who one of their biggest weaknesses last year was the play of the interior of their offensive line. Somewhat in the running game, but especially in pass protection. Now, during the offseason, you allowed your best guard to leave in James Carpenter to go to the Jets, and you traded away your starting center in Max Unger. A unit that had some issues as it was, just got a whole lot weaker. And mind you, the Seahawks really didn't have a next man up for either one of those positions. Through 4 games, Russell Wilson has been under siege. He's been sacked 18 times, hit many other times, pressured consistently, and with the worst pressure of all, it's not the pressure up the edge a lot of times, it's that pressure that comes straight in the quarterback's face up the middle. The running game, yes, Marshawn Lynch has been bothered by an injury, sure, but the running game has taken a bit of a step back. I mean, it's still a good running game, but part of that is skewed by Russell Wilson and what he brings to the table. It's not the same type of offense when you look at it from a running game standpoint, and most importantly of all, a physical identity standpoint. So you bring in Jimmy Graham, and you weaken another area that was already a weakness. You better damn sure well hope that Jimmy Graham is going to do some big spectacular things outside to help mask that. But that hasn't happened. Through a quarter of the season, 4 games, Jimmy Graham is second on the team in receptions and targets, third on the team in receiving yards. He has 20 receptions, 198 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Doug Baldwin has more targets and more receptions than Jimmy Graham. Doug Baldwin and Jermaine Kearse have more receiving yards than Jimmy Graham. Jimmy Graham, a guy that they gave up a starting NFL center and a first-round pick, a truly valuable commodity in today's NFL for, is averaging less than 50 yards receiving per game. I know I see a problem with this. I'm sure a lot of you see a major problem with this. And I would hope that at some point in time, the Seahawks would start to see a problem with this. Why pay the price that you paid? Why sit there and give up what you gave up to get Jimmy Graham and not use him? Doug Baldwin has more targets and receiving yards than Jimmy Graham. Jermaine Kearse also has more receiving yards than Jimmy Graham. Russell Wilson has looked for Doug Baldwin more than he has looked for Jimmy Graham. If that's not ridiculous, I don't know what the hell is. You're paying this guy superstar money. In part, you traded Max Unger and let James Carpenter go in free agency to be able to free up the salary cap space that was necessary in order to bring a Jimmy Graham onto the roster. Why trade for him if you're not going to use him? And furthermore, why trade for him if you're not going to use him in the best ways possible that get the most out of Jimmy Graham and as a byproduct carry the most benefit to the Seahawks offense? We know what Jimmy Graham is and we know what Jimmy Graham isn't. We know that he's a really good mismatch on the outside for opposing linebackers and safeties and even slot corners. You get him one-on-one in those situations, big things are going to happen. You know that he's a guy that can go up and get the jump balls. He can make the big explosive plays. He can make the tough catches. He's a guy that you don't have to worry about him being open because he could still potentially be open based off of his size, based off of his catch radius, based off of his vertical abilities, his utilization of his body, his hands, all of these things. He's an explosive difference maker on offense, or at least he's supposed to be. Apparently when you go to Seattle, it doesn't happen that way. But we also know what he isn't. We know he's not a guy that's incredibly physical. We know that he's a guy that is very affected when other teams get physical with him. He's a guy that when you can double team him and you can kind of shade him and cover him in multiple ways, that he can kind of be taken out of the game plan. We also know that he's a horrible run blocker. It's not his deal. It's not his thing. So why, if you're the Seattle Seahawks, would you bring in Jimmy Graham with the price that you paid for him and utilized him in the exact opposite ways that New Orleans did that helped him become a Pro Bowl, all-pro caliber tight end to fucking begin with? I'm watching the Seattle Seahawks throughout the season, and they're trying to make Jimmy Graham an inline run blocker. What the fuck are you doing? Instead of trying to figure out ways to use him, like get him set up on some screen passes, throw him some short slants, some quick outs, just things to get him in rhythm, things to get him involved, things to get some timing and chemistry between him and Russell Wilson, things to get defenses focused on him and starting to gravitate towards him that could open up things on the outside. The Seahawks are freaking using him as a run blocker. When they do have a mismatch with him in the slot, let's say against a linebacker or a safety, Russell Wilson's dumbass is sitting there making his first read to Luke freaking Wilson out of the slot. They're running formations with two fullbacks and a freaking running back or wide receiver on one side and leaving Jimmy Graham alone, meaning they're not targeting him. What the fuck is wrong with the Seattle Seahawks? Why pay the superstar price you had to pay, you had to give up in order to get a Jimmy Graham just to make him into another guy? For all the things you can say about Bill Belichick, a lot of them, questionable, a lot of them also very good. The one thing that is the true measure of his greatness as a coach over the years is the fact that he can get the most out of people. In fact, he can get more than anybody ever envisioned possible. He puts guys in the best possible situations to succeed, and as a result, they make a maximum impact, which as a byproduct, makes the maximum impact for the team. He doesn't bring in guys and make them another guy. He takes another guy and makes him a guy. The Seattle Seahawks, for some reason, seem destined, similar to what it seems like they were willing to do with Percy Harvin, which is an entirely different thing, mind you, but they seem determined to take Jimmy Graham and just make him another guy. Why pay him the salary that you're paying him? Why give up the first-round pick in the starting center and allow your starting left guard to leave in free agency to take Jimmy Graham and bring him in to just be another guy? That makes absolutely no fucking sense. If you're John Schneider and Pete Carroll, why make the deal if that's going to happen? Why make the deal if that's what you're going to do? You don't make another area even weaker just to have him come in and make absolutely no impact. If you're going to weaken this other area, then the only way you're going to mask that and the only way you're going to justify that is for Jimmy Graham to be making big explosive plays all over the place and dominating and being heavily featured in your offense, which, of course, for some damn reason you've determined that you're not going to do. Maybe it's an overconfidence and arrogance in the system that you have. But let's face it, from a passing game standpoint, you really don't have much of a system. That's why you brought in Jimmy Graham to change that, to impact that. And, of course, you put him in a situation to go from being the guy to just being another guy. And that is ridiculous. And then I look at offensive coordinator Darrell Bevell. Seriously, what the fuck are you doing? Doug Baldwin has more targets than Jimmy Graham. Doug Baldwin! And the way that you game plan, the way that you call your plays, the way that you structure your offense, looks like you don't even want to try to make Jimmy Graham the type of big-time impactful difference maker in the passing game that he was brought in to be, that he is supposed to be. Again, like I said, when you're drawing up plays that feature two fullbacks and another tight end not named Jimmy Graham on one side, and you're running wide receiver screens, you've got Jimmy Graham lined up against a linebacker or a safety, and you're throwing to Luke Wilson as your primary target. What the fuck are you doing? Who comes up with this shit? As I would say in professional wrestling, who books this shit? In this case, I would say, who calls this shit? Apparently, Darrell Bevel's dumbass does. And then also Russell Wilson, too. I know, one of the golden children of the NFL media, and you got to be careful talking about him, but Jesus H. Christ. You would think if Russell Wilson wanted to take that next step and actually become the elite quarterback that so many people already foolishly, mistakenly claim him and believe him to be, then he would want to get Jimmy Graham as involved in the offense as humanly possible. If I'm going to force the ball to anybody, I'm going to force the ball to Jimmy Graham. If I'm going to sit there and stare down anybody, I'm going to stare down Jimmy Graham. When all hell goes to the handbasket and I've only got time to go through one read because the interior of my offensive line is providing yet again horrible pass protection, I'm going to look for Jimmy Graham. I'm not trying to scramble around to find Jermaine Kearse. I'm not trying to sit there and find ways to get Ricardo Lockett or Doug Baldwin involved in the offense. I'm trying to figure out ways to let Jimmy Graham be the monster that Jimmy Graham was supposed to be, hence why he paid the monster price to bring in the monster to fucking begin with. This is ridiculous. For the whole Seahawks organization, what the hell are you doing with this guy? Run screens for him. Hell, hand him the ball out of the backfield. Why the fuck not? Line him up in the backfield some. Change the look. Send him in motion more. Do everything except what the fuck you're doing with this guy. Stop trying to make him just another guy. Stop trying to make him an inline blocker. Pull your heads out of your asses and come to your goddamn senses. This is seriously one of these situations where I legitimately think, which is sad to say because it shouldn't be true, and a lot of times it's not true, but this is one of these exceptions, one of these certain instances that the people that should know better in the NFL don't fucking know better, and legitimately the fans and media know better than the Seattle Seahawks. You look at their offense, they're just as bad and just as inconsistent and just as lacking in explosive big plays on a consistent basis and struggle just as much to put up big points as they have been the past couple of years. And all the while, Russell Wilson's even under more siege. Their running game is not quite the same, and their passing game is no different. They have turned Jimmy Graham into another dude. You don't trade for Jimmy Graham, pay the price that you pay in terms of players and draft picks, and pay him the salary that you're paying him this year to make him another dude. The next game against the Bengals, Jimmy Graham should have 15 fucking targets. Screw this, screw that. You find a way to get him involved early and often. You ride or die with that motherfucker, period. This whole shit is spreading the wealth. Spreading the wealth is part of the problem. That means you don't have a go-to guy. He's supposed to be your go-to guy. Treat him like the go-to guy. Feed him like the go-to guy. And you can watch him potentially produce for you like a go-to guy. Seriously, Seahawks, what the hell are you doing with Jimmy Graham? Pull your heads out of your asses and fix it while you still can.